All right. So I'm going to draw up we'll first see a picture of Göbekli Tepe. And guys, these places were only discovered in the past few decades, okay? So these are new places. We're only starting to understand these places. And so this place is in Turkey, in central Turkey. And this dates back to about 9500 BC. So this is about over 11,000 years old. And we don't even think this is the oldest place, okay? So if you did your research, you will know that this is basically a place of religious worship. You can see that they constructed this place so that there are these T-shaped pillars, okay? And these things are huge, right? This is a human being, and this is a T-shaped pillar, okay? We think, again, this is all theory, okay? This is all what we know. And we don't know that much because this is all recent, okay? But we think that these T-shapes represent human beings, okay? And within these T-shapes are animals. And you can see that they've aligned or they built this T-shape in a way that they can practice a ritual or a worship, okay? So the people who are leading this were probably who we call shamans, okay? Or religious leaders that help us bridge our world with the animal world and the spirit world, okay? So these are shamans. And so Göbekli Tepe is a place of religious worship. Now what's interesting about Göbekli Tepe is that the religious site is the oldest, but we also find houses that are built later on, okay? So what we think might have happened here is that hunter-gatherers will come to a place now and then to practice religion. Because ultimately, as human beings, and we discussed this last class, we have a yearning or we have a need to understand why. And religion solves this problem for us. Also, as hunter-gatherer, you need to associate with other hunter-gatherers in order to find mates, okay? To find husbands and wives to reproduce. And so this sort of religious center, it's a great time to come and practice your religion, but it's also a great time to feast and to meet someone you can marry and have children with, okay? So that was the original function of the temple. Now, these places are often led by shamans. And what makes them special is that they are charismatic leaders. Okay? Charismatic leaders. Charismatic leaders are people like Mao Zedong, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, okay? They're people who, for whatever reason, people just love them and want to follow them. Okay? And so maybe what happened was that these charismatic leaders, they built this place and they became like celebrities. And people came from all over to meet them, to hear the religion, and to meet other people. And over time, some people even chose to stay with them and build houses to celebrate them, okay? And then when they died, what happened was they still worshiped them in their death. And so this place became a temple. Okay? Does that make sense? So that's one theory about Göbekli Tepe. There are other theories, okay? There are some people who will tell you that space aliens came down and built this place because it's so sophisticated. Okay? But so there are different theories, but the one that scholars most agree with today, okay, is that it was a religious center. Any questions before I move on?
So these leaders spread religions or others spread religions?
Okay, so that's a great question, okay? Where does religion come from? And this is something that we will look at very closely next class. And the answer is this, okay. Even though we all have the need for religion, we don't all have the ability to produce religion, okay? So who these charismatic leaders are people who have visions or dreams of God or the spirit world, okay? And then they present their visions to other people. And we have people like this throughout human history, right? So think of Jesus. Think of Muhammad. Think of Buddha. Think of Confucius, right? These are people who have these visions of God or of spirituality or of a new world and present to people. And because they're charismatic, they're able to attract followers and spread their religion. And that's what probably happened here as well. Because as you can see from this picture, it was very hard work to build this temple. Okay? This is 11,000 years ago. They didn't have bulldozers. They didn't have shovels, okay? This is all by hand. So for them to want to dedicate their lives to building this temple, because it took a long, long time, right? It took years and years and hundreds of people. Well, you needed something called religious devotion, right? Faith. Does that make sense? Okay? And again, throughout human history, we've seen this, right? So think of Christians, think of Buddhists, think of Muslims, religious faith. So that's what built this. Okay? So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions before I continue? Yeah?
Temple built like this for a reason because there are lots of layers and like a maze.
Okay. So that's a good question. Why is a temple structured like this? Okay? And the answer is that there's cosmological significance to the structure. Meaning that on a certain time of the year, what will happen is that the sun will hit this place in a certain way. So it's almost like a clock. Does that make sense to you guys? They designed this in a way so they can tell time. But their intention was not to tell time. Their intention was to connect with the outer world. Right? Does that make sense to you guys? So they were extremely sophisticated. They knew a lot about the way the stars worked. Okay? So basically for them, this is science, okay? Today we say this is a religion, but their science back then is no different from our science today. Okay? Does that answer your question? Okay. And you had a question?
Did the leaders, like the religious leaders, they just made up the vision, or they really had the vision?
Okay. So if you talk to any religious people, they saw it, okay? They were there. They talked to God. Right? So we're like, well, that doesn't make any sense, but they really believe it. And that's why they're able to convince their followers. Okay, so you go back so in the future we will look at someone like Muhammad, who had religious visions in a cave. And you're like, did he really see an angel? Well, he thought he really did. Okay? And in fact, in our research, what we discovered is that people who use something called psychedelics, okay? Do you know what psychedelics are? Psychedelics are drugs. What these drugs do is they shift your neural system so that you see the world in a different way. When you do that, you're able to have different visions, okay? But we also know that if you go hungry for a long time, or if you meditate for a long time, you're able to see different things. So from their perspective, they actually saw this thing. Okay, even though we don't think it actually happened. Does that make sense? For them, it's true. But maybe for us, it's not so true. Okay? All right, any more questions?